The spread for Notre Dame's matchup against Texas A&M continues to move in favor of the Aggies. So, does Vegas know something that we don't? More on that coming right up.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. And today is Thursday, August 22nd. And thank you for getting your day started right here by making this your first listen of the day. I'm Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018, and now I'm a producer at Fox Sports. And this show is free and available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate it if you would go ahead and like this video and subscribe if you are watching along on YouTube and you like what you see. Or if you're listening to the pod, please take a second to leave a 5-star rating and subscribe because it really goes a long way in helping out this show. So I greatly appreciate everyone who's done so already and everyone who chooses to do so now. This episode is presented by Ultimate GM. Ultimate College Football HC is a brand new mobile game that is completely free, has no ads, and 100% playable offline. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Begin your coaching legacy today. All right, got a great show in store for you today. I had the chance to catch up with a great friend of the program, VSiN's own Tim Murray, who is a gambling expert, radio host, college football sideline reporter, and maybe most importantly, a diehard Notre Dame fan. Tim had some really interesting insight as to why the betting line for Notre Dame's season opener has shifted significantly in favor of Texas A&M. Then we break down some other key games on Notre Dame's schedule, their season win total, plus some over-unders for key players on the Irish this fall, and we even talk about Riley Leonard's Heisman chances. Let's bring him in. It's great to have Tim Murray back with me here before the start of the regular season. And Tim, let's start with that season opener against Texas A&M. The last time I had you on was a little over a month ago in the middle of July, and at the time, it was basically a pick'em game. Now, Texas A&M is favored by 3 on FanDuel and pretty much every other book that I have seen. So what factors do you think led to this shift in favor of the Aggies?
Yeah, it's, I think first and foremost, you start with the offensive line. Obviously, Charles Jagasaw got injured about 2 weeks ago. So we saw an initial line move right when that happened. And we saw both from a side perspective, moving from a pick 'em out to 1. And then we also saw the total go from 49 down to 47, which fortunately I was able to grab a little piece of 49 on the under, and we could talk about the total. But, I think it is just the belief that these two teams are pretty equal. And, Kyle Field is believed to be one of the most daunting environments, challenging environments in college football. And when you look at the strengths of Texas A&M, their strength is defensive line. And Notre Dame's weakness heading into this year, it's pretty obvious. It's the offensive line. Now, could the offensive line be good? Sure. But it's 6 career starts. And, we don't know for sure, but it certainly sounds like it's, going to be a true freshman at left tackle. It's going to be a true sophomore at left guard. And it's a lot of surprises there. So, I think, Marcus Freeman and company are going to have to get pretty creative. Mike Denbrock is getting paid a whole lot of money to figure this out. Joe Rudolph as well, obviously. So I think the line move is sharp action. Someone texted me today wondering, hey, is this public or is this sharp? I'm like, look, man, public doesn't really get involved until, right before games. And more often than not, public doesn't move lines. And I'll actually give you a quote, if I can find it quick enough here, from Circa Sports, who actually chimed in on one of the responses. I mean, by the way, the responses today were hilarious. So much variance from, this is the bowl that, under the underachieving bowl to, put every dollar that you own on Notre Dame, all of that. But Circa Sports responded to Irish Gipper, and he said, more people are betting on Texas A&M, and Vegas is moving the line to get more people to bet on Notre Dame. And Circa Sports responded and said, FWIW, bets from the general public don't move lines. A line move typically means there's new information about the game or someone sharp placed a bet, or both. So, if you're wondering, hey, is this the public? It is not. It is a sharp guy or sharp group or a little bit more information coming out. And maybe it's a little bit of both. So yeah, that's why I think we're at 3. And I thought we would get a little buyback, and maybe we will ultimately. But yeah, it's been a surprisingly one-way traffic here lately on this line.
It's really interesting too, because you and I were texting offline last week and the line had shifted to 2.5, and you said, yeah, I don't see it getting to 3. And now here we are just over a week out from the game. That's exactly where it is. I do expect some movement back to the Notre Dame side. And I was thinking of all the factors, like, okay, the offensive line makes sense. When the initial move happened after the Charles Jackson injury, that made sense to me. The fact that it continues to move at this point in time, I think it's probably because of a sharp bet there, unless if I wanted to be a conspiracy theorist, maybe there's something with Howard Cross's injury that maybe we don't know about, because he has not been a full participant throughout camp. I mean, Notre Dame has doubled down to the media that when he left to practice, he was due to load management, but he also admitted to the media that he's been dealing with some sort of a hamstring injury, maybe even another lower leg injury. So maybe there's a chance that he's not fully healthy. Maybe Mitchell Evans isn't going to be full go for the game, but we aren't going to know until Notre Dame takes the field against Texas A&M next Saturday. So I think for now we can kind of table all of that. And you already mentioned the under bet. That number continues to go down. Yeah. And that is the most logical thing. Like, I don't think either one of these offenses are going to move the ball much at all in this game. Notre Dame's defense is so good. And we almost take it for granted. But like last year, they made Caleb Williams look like some scrub quarterback. Like, he still gets asked about it today and what happened in that game. So, for as much as we focus on the Notre Dame offensive line and the issues that they have, it's not like Texas A&M doesn't have their issues either. So do you see that under continuing to go down as we get closer and closer to the game?
Yeah, I think it'll come down a little bit. Right now, just looking at the market, it's mostly 46.5. Some 47s out there, just pulling it up as we talk right now. So still some 47s, but mostly moving towards that way. So yeah, I would say that this probably gets to that, 46, 45.5 range. And maybe that's kind of the stop point. But I think the point that you make, and, obviously this is a Notre Dame podcast, and your listeners mostly are thinking from the Notre Dame perspective. But I do think that maybe the Notre Dame defense is getting a little underrated here. I am a believer that both of these defenses are top 10 defenses in the country. And that's why, I wanted to, on my podcast, give out 49. The number got scooped before I could give it out as an official play. But still would lean a little bit towards the under, anything under 45, anything over 45 from that standpoint. But, you mentioned it, and I know people covering the team have talked about the depth of this defensive line. Hopefully you're wrong, and that Howard Cross conspiracy theory is nowhere to be true, and he's just fine. But, you look at the defensive line and Riley Mills and RJ Oben coming in, and obviously Howard Cross being one of the more effective pass rushers in the country. And I think the biggest development outside of maybe the Charles Jagasaw injury of preseason is that Benjamin Morrison's healthy, right, is 100%. And the fact that, you look at the cornerback room, and, they had a true competition, and that Christian Gray beat out Jaden Mickey. And, it seems like, Adon Schuler is maybe beating out Rod Hurd. Like it feels like the word coming out of the defensive side of camp is that, like, people aren't being, and I think, the Irish Illustrated guys might have talked about this, but it seems like on the defensive side, people are beating out others for jobs, while on the offensive side, it's like, okay, maybe Tosh Baker isn't going to be ready to go there on the left side of the line. So hopefully we're proved wrong, but I think the defense, win or lose this game, and obviously if they lose this game, the pressure is going to be on Notre Dame massively in order to run the table to get to the college football playoff. But this was, let's be realistic. I know a lot of Notre Dame fans were chiming in and saying that Notre Dame, should be the favorite and et cetera. Look, no matter what, this was going to be the hardest game of the year. I truly believe that. USC at the end of the year, I think USC may be a little bit better than some people anticipate, especially if the defense starts to click with DeAnton Lynn coming over from UCLA. But you get Florida State at home, you get Louisville at home. USC, we'll see what they do after a brutal schedule. This was always going to be the toughest game of the entire year, with the heat and humidity, with the crowd, with all that's involved with it, with Mike Elko being the new head coach down there, with the talent that's on this roster. This was going to be the toughest game. And I think with the new, wrinkles in the challenges for Notre Dame from an injury standpoint, I think it's going to bear out that this will be the hardest game until hopefully the playoff.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned a few of those other games because I wanted to dive into those as well. So there are a few more lines available right now on FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, Notre Dame is favored by 9.5 against Louisville in Week 5. They're favored by 4.5 against Florida State, and they are only favored by 3.5 at USC. Now, we know that in the past, Notre Dame, even when they're a far superior team talent-wise to USC, they just seem to struggle with them on the road to close out the regular season. So you already mentioned that you believe Texas A&M is going to be the toughest game on the schedule. I agree with you, and that's reflected in these spreads. But how would you rank those other three games in terms of your level of concern? And we can put the spread aside right now, just in terms of winning and losing in those games.
I think it's the way the spread is, and that's not a cop-out. Let's talk about situations. So we'll start with Louisville. I think Louisville is a bit down this year, and I think, talking about injuries, Notre Dame's not the only one who's dealing with injuries. Colin Lacey, is an absolute stud, and was a borderline All-American a year ago. Comes in via the transfer portal, and he's going to be out with that collarbone injury. So he'll probably miss the Notre Dame game. If he's around, is he going to be fully healthy? I'm not a big Tyler Shuck guy. I know last year Jack Plummer played well, but Notre Dame just imploded right down the stretch in the third quarter and the fourth quarter. So I think for Notre Dame, from a standpoint of motivation, obviously they're coming out and they're saying this is the green out game. I think that was a really smart thing to do to avoid. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of Louisville fans that show up. This isn't going to be like Ohio State, from where I was beyond impressed by the Notre Dame faithful to show up and show out. But I do think the bringing in the WWE guy and, all of that, wearing the green uniforms, I think that's really important for this game. And I think Notre Dame's not going to overlook Louisville. I mean, they were embarrassed last year in Louisville. It was a brutal scheduling spot this year for Notre Dame. And, let's hope that Chuck Martin squad, who is, by the way, a decent MAC squad there in Miami of Ohio. But, you're looking at Texas A&M, Northern Illinois, Purdue, Miami of Ohio. Notre Dame should be geared up to go for this game. So I don't want to say I'm not worried at all, but, I think from a motivational standpoint, the fact that they got whooped last year and embarrassed on national television, I think they'll be ready to go. Worth noting, by the way, that Notre Dame has yet to cover a Peacock exclusive game. Just point that out. It's kind of a random stat, but I did find that it's Toledo, UNLV, and then I think Central Michigan have been the Peacock exclusive game. So that game doesn't necessarily worry me. Look, Florida State, we'll learn more about them in week 0, obviously. And I'm a believer in Mike Norvell and what he's done down there. And, they came up to Notre Dame Stadium during the COVID year. It was a complete and utter rebuild for that program. And, Notre Dame, beat them, but Norvell and company were relatively competitive. That was the Notre Dame situation. I think that was their first game after their COVID pause. And then we remember how 2021 started, down there and needing overtime and almost blowing that lead to a Florida State team that, didn't even make a bowl game. So Norvell's a good coach. But let's talk about the situation for that one. It's going to be the biggest home game of the year, no doubt. It's the only night game that Notre Dame has this year. They're coming off a bye. And what is Florida State doing the weeks prior? They play at Duke, which I'm pretty low on Duke this year, but okay, at Duke, at Miami, home to North Carolina. 4th game in 4 weeks for Florida State. They've got to travel to the elements. I think from a situational standpoint, Notre Dame is in a massive advantage there for Florida State to come to town. So I do think Florida State, is going to be better. I don't know if they'll be better than we think. The win total is 9.5, and they're the favorite to win the ACC. So it's not like they're, slept on, so to speak. But I think of the three, the team that I'm starting to get a little more worried about is USC, man. And, we'll find out what they've got Labor Day weekend when they play at Allegiant Stadium against LSU, which should be fun for Notre Dame fans. Pick your poison of who you want to cheer for, USC or Brian Kelly. But, Miller Moss, I'm really curious to see what he is, man, because like in the small glimpse that we got in the Holiday Bowl, he was pretty darn impressive. And Lincoln Riley has a decent track record of coaching up quarterbacks. And I alluded to the defense. Like, this wasn't just a defense that, added D'Anton Lynn. This was a defense that added D'Anton Lynn, added Doug Belk. And if I remember correctly, Tyler, you can correct me, but I think Belk was on a short list once upon a time to be Notre Dame's defensive coordinator. And he's now the secondary coach at USC. And then they went to North Dakota State, poached their head coach, Matt Enns, I believe, and he's going to be their linebacker coach. So the defense is going to be better. I don't know if it could get any worse. Obviously, you lose Caleb Williams, which is, the best quarterback in the, country, at least based off of, draft spot. But I'm a little worried about that game. That said, I'm just going to read people the schedule who are, unaware of what USC has this year. One of the hardest schedules in the entire country. You open up the season, LSU, you've got Michigan on the road, Wisconsin, you're at at Minnesota, hosting Penn State. You play Nebraska, you avoid Ohio State and Oregon, but it's a pretty brutal schedule. Per Phil Steele, it's the third most difficult schedule in the country. So, where is that team from a depth standpoint heading into that final game of the season?
And just think about the circumstances going into that game for both teams. I mean, on one hand, USC could be reeling, or maybe they're a 3-loss team who's still probably on the outside looking in terms of the expanded playoff, but still a lot to play for there. And I think with Notre Dame, so much of it depends on what happens in this game against Texas A&M, because it feels so much like 2018. Like, if they can just get through the season opener, I don't care how they do it. It doesn't have to be pretty. Just win that game, and then that schedule really opens up. Because I agree with you. I think all Notre Dame fans should be watching this Florida State-Georgia Tech game with an eye on Florida State, obviously, but also keep an eye on Georgia Tech. Like, they had a good offense last year. They started to build some momentum. I think the line for that game went from like 13.5 to 11.5. Florida State's still favored, obviously, but a lot of people think Georgia Tech is going to be very much in that game. And I agree. I think that's going to be a tricky game at Mercedes-Benz. So there's not as many big games on the schedule this year. Florida State should be a really big game, night game, classic program, all that stuff. But I'm with you. I think Louisville, they should handle. If they don't come out ready to go and just dominate them after what happened last year, that's frankly an embarrassment. Personally, I can't go through another year listening to my Louisville friends talk trash to me, so they better do it for me. And then Florida State, I just really don't know what to expect yet. I mean, with DJ Uiagalelei, yes, things went pretty well for Oregon State last season, but he still was not a great passer. I don't think that it's going to change this year, other than maybe Mike Norvell puts him in a little bit more advantageous situations. And then USC is just tricky because it's USC. It's a rivalry game to close out the year. So with all that being said, Notre Dame's win total still 10.5. The over is at plus 142 on FanDuel. The under is minus 176 right now. Do you still feel comfortable taking the over, given what they're going up against it at Texas A&M, and then how the rest of the schedule plays out?
Yeah, the more I think about it, I think I've probably changed my tune a little bit. I do have a bet, and I think we talked about it, which was kind of unique. I think this team, I don't want to say guaranteed, but it would be deemed an absolute and utter disaster if this team only wins 9 games. So I think 10 should be the floor. I think they're capable of 11. But if you lose that first game, I just feel like the pressure is going to be so massive that they might stub their toe somewhere. And I don't know if it's Georgia Tech. I agree. I have a star by it here in my, Phil Steele magazine. I think that could be the one trappy type of game. I don't really envision them stumbling at home, and we can get to that. But the USC game is going to be challenging, man. And, if you're 10-1 going into that game, knowing that Texas A&M, what are they going to be? That might be a win and in situation for Notre Dame. So I would, right now, I would say it's more likely they're 10 wins than 11. But I probably wouldn't bet the 10.5, especially at the price at, minus 176 to the under. So look, I think it's as crazy as it sounds. I mean, it boils down to Texas A&M. It's unfortunate that they have to put all their eggs in this basket, but yeah, I mean, I think that's what it comes down to.
So you seem to be on the same page as me. I kind of look at it as Notre Dame's either going undefeated and they beat Texas A&M, or they lose that game and they go 10-2. Like 11-1 just doesn't. I just don't see it happening. I don't see them losing that first game and then winning out, because there's going to be just so much added pressure on every single game. Whereas if they beat Texas A&M, they're cruising. I really think that the reason people are putting so much pressure on this game, one, obviously because it's the season opener, but two, I don't want to say it's going to be the difference between them making the playoff and not making the playoff, because I still think they could make it at 10-2, but it's totally out of their hands if they do end up going 10-2.
Well, look, and if you go 10-2, you're not hosting a playoff game. And this program has gone all in on this year. $9 million for over 4 years for both coordinators. Highly paid roster, whether it's going in the portal and getting Riley Leonard or roster retention. This is a program that has gone all in on this year, and it's a very important year for Marcus Freeman. I'm not saying that he's going to be on a hot seat or anything like that, but Tyler, if they go 9-3 next year, look, I think we're all kind of under the assumption that next year is going to be a challenging season. Not to say that they'll be 3-9 like Charlie Weiss's third year, but I think that you're looking at a handful of losses next year with a younger team, and that's fine if you're coming off of a playoff season and maybe multiple wins. So, I'm hoping that Marcus Freeman, and I think he did, learned a lot from, his first 2 years. And you think back to year one, and he talked about how much stock he put into that first Ohio State game, and then they lose to Marshall, right? They, from a statistical standpoint, Notre Dame was a dominant program, last year. I mean, the stats were outrageous. But we
look at the guys they put in the NFL too.
Yeah, and we as fans, look at the Clemson game, look at the Louisville game, and just shake our heads about the frustration that they were. I mean, obviously the Ohio State game. I mean, having 10 men on the field, the dropped interception, all of that, the screen pass, etc. So, this is the year where it's kind of all come together. And I was talking to college football handicapper Brad Powers, who's also a Notre Dame fan, and he said on my show the other night, Tyler, if Joe Alt was the left tackle on this team, he said this team would be maybe a national championship type level team. I mean, it's that deep. There's explosiveness. The wide receiver room is very solid. I'm not going to say great. It's solid. Maybe not all the way to the title, but he felt like multiple wins in the playoff. And it's just, it's kind of unfortunate as we shake our heads and be like, man, it's like so many times with Notre Dame over the years. And I know, for non-Notre Dame fans, that might be shaking your heads and be like, you guys have it pretty good, but it never feels like everything can come together. Like if the 2021 line the 2022 line was with this team, this team would be absolutely loaded for bear, but such is life. Joe Alt left after 3 years. Blake Fisher left after 3 years. And, you got to roll with the punches, and the roster's really good. And, look, I know the line's been moving, and if I was forced to make the pick today, Tyler, I would pick Texas A&M to win the game, but it's a 3-point spread. Like, do you want to go through what Notre Dame was a 3-point underdog at home to Ohio State? They should have won that game, right? You look at 2 years ago, they were an underdog at Syracuse, and they won that game. They were an underdog to Clemson at home.
They
won that game.
Syracuse. So, I forgot about that.
So
it's also the season opener too.
Yeah, I mean, let's look back, and I know it was kind of a fluky game, just like things kind of went Notre Dame's way, but Notre Dame was a 6-point underdog at Soldier Field to Wisconsin, and I know they were losing going into the fourth quarter, but they ultimately won that game 41-13. Now, they got like a couple pick sixes and things got a little weird at the end of the game, but like, I get it. Notre Dame's an underdog, and it's going to be a hostile environment. But look, and I know this game probably gets brought up too much, and that's kind of a sad statement, but in 2012, Notre Dame went to Oklahoma, and everyone expected them to get their brains beat in, and they went in there and took care of business. So they brought in a offensive coordinator that was a Broyles Award finalist a year ago and gave him $9 million over 4 years. It's his job to figure this out. They've got a coaching staff that they believe in to figure out, hey, you're going up against an elite defensive line. We got to figure things out and to put this thing together. So it feels like, I don't want to say it's doom and gloom, right now, because based off of my mentions, people think that, Vegas has hit the wrong button, made a mistake and favored the wrong team. But like I said, I think Texas A&M, if I had to pick it right now, would be my selection. But Notre Dame is a 3-point underdog, meaning if this game was on a neutral field, it would be a pick 'em. And that's kind of what you need to look at this line as.
Yeah. And you know who else was pursuing Mike Denbrock this offseason? Texas
Texas
A&M.
A&M. Yeah.
And he earned a big raise because of that at LSU, but fortunately he didn't sign it, and that is a big reason why Notre Dame was able to get him. So I'm with you. I understand why Texas A&M is favored. I still think Notre Dame can and should pull this one out. Tim will be right back here with us in a second to break down some over-unders for Notre Dame players this season. But first, I got to tell you about Ibotta. It's summertime, which means it's barbecue season. Stock up on all of your grilling favorites and earn cash back on every purchase when you use Ibotta. So you won't have to choose between burgers or hot dogs. You can get both. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. You can earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what it is that you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight that you've been eyeing, or the fancy dinner that you've been craving. Other apps give you points that don't really amount to much. With Ibotta, you earn cash back that you can withdraw to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. Simply add offers in the app, upload your receipt, and voila, the money is yours. You can save on over 2,400 brands and shop at over 1,000 retailers, including your favorite grocery stores, Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. It's time you join the over 50 million users who use Ibotta to earn cash back every time they shop. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKEDONCollege. All right, let's get into some player props here. And you and I have talked about this before. I was not super high on Riley Leonard. I just felt he was a little bit overrated. This dates back to last year when Notre Dame was playing Duke. I have since come around. I've drank the Kool-Aid. I'm all in on Riley Leonard, but I'm more into him as a runner than a passer. Right now, his regular season passing yards total on FanDuel is 2,525.5. Would you take the over or under there?
So that would be a little over 200 yards per game. I would take the under. I do think this will be a better offense from a passing standpoint, obviously with the weapons, but I think you hit it. I think you're going to really see Riley Leonard use his legs a bunch. I wouldn't be surprised if he had some big games. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a game in the middle of this season that he may not play, if they're going to utilize his legs. And, you look at the depth of this room that Notre Dame has, and this might be the healthiest quarterback room that they've, I don't know if ever is the right way to look at it, but from 1 to 4, I think you're relatively confident with Steve Angeli. Obviously, you're very curious about CJ Parr, and then we don't know about Kenny Minchie, but, reports are that he's been pretty impressive. But, would I be shocked if Riley Leonard missed a Stanford game or something like that? No. So I think when you look at season totals, it's always hard for me to go over just because everything kind of has to go right. And I don't know, for Notre Dame, Tyler, to be super successful, do you want Riley Leonard averaging over 200 yards per game, like through the air, or do you want it to be kind of, 190 to 200, and then he's rushing for 30 to 40 a game, and Jeremiah Love and, Jadarian Price are really involved in the run game. So I think he'll have some moments, but I think ultimately at that number, 25-25, I would probably go under.
I think he's going to get over. And if you look back at what Notre Dame had last year, Sam Hartman threw for just under 2,700 yards. So, and there were several games last season when Hartman was throwing less than 200. So I do think that it's possible. I think that he could. But now I want to get in some player props that I actually made up myself, but they're not just made up out of thin air. There's usually some purpose behind everyone. So I'm going to put Riley Leonard rushing yards at 803.
Whew.
That number is what Brandon Wimbush rushed for in 2017.
I'll go under. I think Riley Leonard's a better thrower than Brandon Wimbush, and I don't think
I would hope.
Yeah, I don't think you have to solely rely on his legs. I don't know if you want him rushing for 800 yards. That's what, doing the quick math, like 70 yards per game, somewhere in that ballpark, right? 600 would be 50. So
yeah, I mean, if we're doing the full regular season, it'd be like 67 yards a game.
Yeah, so
if he plays every game.
I don't know if you want that, and I think you're going to get a lot of Price and Love, and I think I'll go under on that one.
I agree with you, and I think a big reason why is because all the things that you mentioned with Brandon Wimbush only being effective as a runner, but I also think that there's a lot of games in Notre Dame's schedule where they're not going to ask Riley Leonard to run much at all. Like I think he's going to run a lot. I would take the over on whatever the number is on true carries for Riley Leonard against Texas A&M, because I think they're going to run read option and just RPO them to death, because that is one great way to sort of neutralize really good defensive ends, because then you force them into making a decision every single time. Then you just trust Riley that he's going to make the right decision to counter that. Okay, I got another one for you here. Jeremiah Love rushing yards, 850.
I'll go over. I think he's going to have a big year. And, looking back, I don't think he'll be a full-on bell cow like Estime was, who rushed for over 1,300 yards. Yeah. And I do think Price should have his fair share of carries, but I think with the explosiveness that Jeremiah Love has, and I think the fact that Riley Leonard is his quarterback, where, as you alluded to, a lot of read options, I think it opens up some things there for Jeremiah Love. I think ultimately what's going to be fascinating is the total yards from Jeremiah Love.
I was just about to say I would take the over if it was the total, under on rushing.
Yeah, I think total yards, if you add like another 300 to that for receiving yards or something like that, I think he's going to be a big, big weapon. And I'm really curious to see what Denbrock does with those two running backs. Is he going to split out Jeremiah Love sometimes into the slot? Like, that's what I'm so fascinated about. I know I'm kind of going into a tangent here, but like, for Notre Dame, Denbrock said this the other day, right? There doesn't seem to be an alpha, but you've got Chris Mitchell over 1,100 yards a year ago, Bo Collins, multiple-year starter at Clemson, Jaden Greathouse, who continues by all accounts to exceed everyone's expectations, Jordan Faison, the freak of nature that he is, and, crushing it in the bowl game, Jaden Harrison, who everyone's glowing about, and his explosiveness. So, you've got all these weapons, and then you include two really good running backs and Mitchell Evans as well. And, the tight end room seems to be, really coming together with, Eli Raridan and Cooper Flanagan. Like, Denbrock doesn't have Malik Neighbors this year. He doesn't have Brian Thomas Jr. this year, but he's got a lot of weapons to utilize. And I hope there's a lot of creativity to kind of get everyone involved this year.
So if there were a bet on which player would lead the team in receptions, I think most people would take Jaden Greathouse. But let's get a little bit more specific with him. If I put his over-under on receptions this regular season at 66, would you take the over or under? And the 66 number I got, that was what Chase Claypool had back in 2019.
I'll go under, man. That's what? That's over 4 receptions per game. I think that it's going to be really spread out this year. And I'm not, Mitchell Evans had 29, and then he got hurt in the Pittsburgh game late in the year. Is that right? So I think Jaden Greathouse will lead the team in receiving receptions, but I don't think there's going to be, I think there's going to be games where he might have 1 or 2 catches, so I think he's going to be really good. But as I alluded to, with so many weapons at the disposal of Mike Denbrock, and I think ultimately, hopefully, that Mike Denbrock is as good of a play caller and play designer as we anticipate, that they're going to find the mismatches and, make sure to pick on people when you've got that. And I think that's the exciting thing this year about Notre Dame is, I think we're going to see big games from Chris Mitchell. I think we're going to see a big game from Bo Collins. I think we're going to see a big game from Jordan Faison, Mitchell Evans. And I think that's why I'm so excited about this offense this year, outside of what feels like a lot of negativity right now around the offensive line, understandably so. I think looking at the weapons that are out there and what Riley Leonard could potentially be, I think people have brought this up, and I think it's a fair point. And look, I was excited about Sam Hartman. I'm not going to pretend that I wasn't, but I think Riley Leonard has a ceiling that hasn't been touched yet, and it felt like Sam Hartman came to Notre Dame accomplishing what he was going to accomplish and just kind of did what ultimately he was, which was a solid quarterback, but he was going to have some bad games, and we saw those bad games.
Yeah, I've made the point before that I feel like so much of our perception about Riley Leonard, and really every quarterback that Notre Dame has had in recent years, is directly tied to the quarterback that played previously. Like, the reason that there was so much hype about Sam Hartman is because we were all subjected to the Drew Pine experience from the year before, and Tyler Buchner as well, who was terrible, at least in the first two games. And then, so we had all this hype about Sam Hartman because you're like, all right, it's going to be so much better than last year. And then that has sort of kind of reversed itself this year because fans are like hesitant to get excited about Riley Leonard because of what happened with Sam Hartman, where it's like, I actually think now Riley Leonard is becoming almost underrated. But I want to ask you a couple props on the defensive side of the ball. I was going to pick a player to do a sack total, but then I realized it's probably more interesting to just ask you, who do you think is going to lead the team in sacks?
Yeah, that's
because it could be a lot of different guys.
I'll say Jordan Botelho. I'm drinking the Botelho Kool-Aid this offseason. Like, the reports that he's kind of become a leader on this team. I know he wasn't elected a captain, but he's had these explosive moments, mostly in bowl games. And the fact that he came back is this his fifth or sixth year? I think it's his fifth year, right?
Fifth, yeah.
The fact that he came back with his fifth year, and, he's had a lot of ups and downs at Notre Dame. I think that shows something, and I'm expecting a big year from Jordan Botelho. So I don't know if the obvious answer would be RJ Oben. Maybe it would be, but I'll say Botelho gets it done. I'm in on Botelho this year.
All right, so I'm going to take Oben. I think he gets 6. That would be a career high for him, and that would be more than any player at Notre Dame last year. JJB led the team in sacks with 5. I would take RJ Oben at 6. Okay, Jack Kaiser tackles 60.
I'll say over. He's 62 last year. JD Bertrand, his numbers actually came down, thankfully. That was a good thing that he wasn't having 100 and some odd tackles.
Yeah.
I just think he's going to be out there every play, and I think ultimately, I don't know if Notre Dame wants him to have, anywhere near JD Bertrand tackle numbers from early on in Bertrand's career, but I'll say that Jack Kaiser does have a pretty good year. And I take over that.
I would take the over as well. All right, fun one. Combined interceptions, Benjamin Morrison, Xavier Watts, 7.5. Watts himself had 7 last year, and Morrison had 3. So it would be a little bit less than what they had last year.
I'll just say under, because I don't think people are going to throw Benjamin Morrison's way. So I think his numbers are going to be pretty low, but he's going to have a PFF grade that's through the roof. I just think he's going to lock people down. And I just think natural regression is going to hit Xavier Watts. So I don't think they're going to be bad, but I think what we saw from Morrison his freshman year and then Watts last year is just so unreal that I'll just say under, but I think they both have good years.
So I would take the under. I think they're going to equal 7, but I have another take. I think Christian Gray is going to lead the team in interceptions because teams are going to try him a lot.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to be throwing Morrison.
Benjamin Morrison's a first-round pick, man. If you look at, if I remember correctly, when Sauce Gardner was at Cincinnati, I don't think he had an interception, or maybe one.
Well, he had one against Notre Dame in the end zone.
Yeah. So, but Kobe Bryant, if I remember correctly, I think he won the best defensive back award.
Yeah, he won the Thorpe Award and wasn't the best defensive back on his own team. And honestly, you could say the same about Xavier Watts last year. Like, he won the Bronco Nagurski Award, and I think most people would take Benjamin Morrison over Xavier Watts.
Oh, yeah. No doubt.
All right. Before we go, give me your official season prediction for the Irish in 2024. Give me regular season. Do they make the playoff? How far do they go? The floor is yours.
Yeah. I really want to say 11-1. But this offensive line worries me. I hope I'm wrong. I'll say 10-2, and I'll say that they.
Who's the other loss?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because I think running the table if they lose to Texas A&M is going to be really hard. But I think their home schedule shapes up really well, with the Louisville game being where it is and the Florida State game being where it is. So I'll say because if they lose to USC, they're not making the playoff. I'm convinced of that. If they're 10-2 and their last loss is to USC, and Texas A&M, let's say they go 8-4 in the SEC, I think they might be on the outside looking in. But I'll try to be a little more positive. I'll say 10-2, but they do sneak into the playoff as the 11 seed. But don't feel great about that. But I do feel like, and I'll give you a bet. It's at DraftKings. Notre Dame over 5.5 home wins is plus 140 to the over. And if you look at the games and how they're set up, Northern Illinois.
That's like true home games, right?
True home
that would
games.
Not technically include Georgia Tech.
Correct. No Georgia Tech, no Navy, no Army. True home games: Northern Illinois, Miami of Ohio, Louisville, Stanford, Florida State, Virginia. Notre Dame will be a favorite in all of those games. They will be a double-digit favorite in 4 of the 6 games. And from a situational standpoint, Louisville, I think, as we talked about, they'll be pretty motivated to win that one. And then I think November 9th off a bye, you would hope that they're pretty motivated for the only night game of the year at home against a team that'll be playing their 4th game in as many weeks, including a showdown with Miami 2 weeks prior. So I did make that bet myself. You have to go undefeated at home, but I think they go over 5.5 home wins. So, 10-2 doesn't feel great. Hopefully it's 11-1. But that opener just makes me nervous right now with the questions on the offensive line.
All right, man. You can watch and listen to Tim every day on VSiN Primetime from 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern. You can also listen to him on the VSiN College Football Podcast, or College Football Betting Podcast, excuse me. Hey, really appreciate the time. It's getting late here, so get some rest, and I'll talk to you again soon. Hopefully, after the opener, we're feeling pretty good, and then all of a sudden we can really fantasize a little bit about 12-0.
I will jump back on the podcast and happily admit that I'm wrong if Notre Dame beats Texas A&M. So maybe I'm just putting the negative vibes out there so they can, end up winning that game. But hopefully I'm wrong, and Notre Dame is smooth sailing to maybe an undefeated season.
Looking forward to it. Hey, Irish fans, I want to take a moment to give you a heads up on a brand new mobile game that I think you are going to love as much as I do. Ultimate College Football HC. In this amazing game and simulation, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your college football program to glory. Can you imagine actually being the head coach of Notre Dame? From recruiting players and hiring your coaching staff to overseeing training camps and handling school scholarships, you control every crucial detail of your program. It's all in your hands. Will you be able to handle the pressure? And here's what I really love about the game. You are responsible for calling offensive plays during the games. Your strategy will not only determine the success of your football season, but will shape the future and legacy of your program. Ultimate College Football HC is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. And of course, we have a special offer for Locked On Irish listeners. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Make sure to take advantage of this perk, as it will get your team off to a strong start. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com. That's ultimate-cfb.com, or look it up on the app stores. That's Ultimate College Football HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. All right, that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Big guest on tap for tomorrow's episode. So make sure you're subscribed to the show on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, because you are not going to want to miss it. Now, for your second listen, check out the Locked On College Football Podcast with Spencer McLaughlin, and I will see you tomorrow, same time, same place.